On this week's episode, we're going to be making spring rolls in the Filipino style. It's a crispy dough with a wonderful meaty umami filling with lots of other flavors wrapped up inside of it to give you this wonderful aroma. For this dish, you're going to need carrots, cucumber, ground pork, yellow onions, garlic, ginger, snake beans, mung bean sprouts, dried shrimp, and tofu.
All right, so we're in the refrigerated section in the Asian market. Sometimes you'll find the dried shrimp in just the dry section, but at this market they keep it in the refrigerator, which I think is a great idea because it helps keep and preserve the flavors and aromas of the shrimp a little bit better. We're looking for a dried shrimp, and if you're not making a lot of this stuff, you probably want to go for the smaller packages rather than the large ones. But additionally, also take note of the different sizes of shrimp, right? The really, really small ones have a lot more surface area to pick up the salt that's used during the drying and preservation of it. So I don't usually prefer this. Typically what I look for is something that's a little bit larger. And then I like it when it feels just a little soft, not completely dried out. And also pay attention to the color. If they're starting to get really dark, it might be rather old and they can start to have kind of like an ammonia scent to it. So look for something that's still got a little pinkish color to it, a little bit larger, and this will be just perfect. All right, so now we're going to prepare the filling for the lumpia. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I've got some firm tofu that is pretty firm, but it's still a little bit wet. So what I'm going to do is put another plate on top, and then you can put something like a weight, right, to weigh it down. And just let that set aside. You can put that half an hour, or you can let it sit overnight, and some of the juices will start to run out and it'll get a little bit more firm. Meanwhile, I've got several other items that I need to work on and prepare. First one, I've got some dried shrimp, which are wonderful. They have a lot of flavor, but they're also heavily salted and they're dry. So I'm going to soak them in warm water for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and what's going to happen is it'll start to draw out some of the salt and soften the shrimp, and then I can chop it up and add it into the filling. Some of the other items for the filling, we've got some carrots, which I need to trim and peel. I like to peel over a paper towel. That way I can discard the peels easily, and also the paper towels are compostable. All right, so when we're done, all right, just pick it up, and that can go into the compost. All right, the carrots I'm going to cut up into about 2 to 3 inch chunks. All right, and then I'm going to slice it very, very thin. You really want this as thin as you can get. 1/16 of an inch would be nice. If you have a mandolin, you can use a mandolin to do this. But of course I like to do it by hand. Right. I'm going to rotate them. I'm going to cut into 1/16 of an inch strips. Don't forget to use the claw when you're cutting close to your hand like that. And take your time. Don't go faster than you're capable of. Keep it safe. All right. So we got all the carrots cut up into nice thin little strips. We've also got some green beans, but I've got an Asian variety of green bean. These are called snake beans, right? They're really really long. These can get up to 3 feet in length. You can tie them in knots. You can do all kinds of interesting things with them. I've seen them presented in, very, very beautifully tied knots after blanching. For this dish, what we're going to do with them is we're just going to cut them into thin little strips. And it's just going to be another one of the vegetables that's in the filling. If you've got any dark spots, typically it starts on the ends. So I'll trim those off, and that's pretty typical of any kind of green bean. So I'll trim off the tips. And any bad spots. And just stack up a few pieces, and we're going to cut it on the bias into thin little circles. All right, so we've got green beans, carrots, lots of nice colorful vegetables. Also got some onions. And I just need to peel this a little bit. So I had a large onion, and so I went ahead and cut it in half, but you only need about half a cup or so of onion. So if you got small ones, you can probably use the whole thing. And I'm just going to slice into the onion almost all the way, but I'm going to stop short of cutting all the way through. And then turn it and dice. And the reason why we don't cut all the way through is because that little piece of onion that's still attached helps hold the whole thing together. If you cut all the way through, it falls apart, and then it's difficult to hold the onion while you're cutting it. And then when you get down to the end, just lay the last little piece down flat. Cut it into strips, rotate, and mince. Also got some ginger in this dish. So I'm going to take about a 2-inch piece, trim, peel, slice thinly. After you slice the ginger thinly, we'll cut it into the thin strips. And then finally, a very, very fine dice. We have 4 cloves of garlic. All right, just smash them and then dice it up very fine. Maybe smash it a little bit more on the board if you want it super fine. All right. And here we have the tofu. I've removed the weight, and you see lots of the juices have come out. And that's going to leave the tofu in a state where it's much more firm. And that's ideal for this dish. I'm going to cut it into half-inch slices. And then I'm going to dice it. We're going to get about half-inch cubes. And then when they fry, they're going to get a little bit smaller. So I'm going to fry these in a pot of oil. The oil should be at about 350 degrees. I'm going to put in one little piece and check. Looks great. And be careful dropping the tofu in. It's still a little wet, and the oil is very hot. If you drop it in too fast, it could splash on you. And sometimes when you're putting very wet product into hot oil, it foams up. And if it foams, it could end up boiling out of the pot. So always try to use a pot that's much deeper than the amount of oil that I'm putting in, so that you have room for that foaming. And I think I'll put about half of the product first. I'm going to use a skimmer to toss it around. Make sure it's not sticking together and that it's all getting evenly cooked. Deep frying the tofu gives it a little bit more flavor, a nice color, and a good texture. A lot of times when people use tofu for the first time, they treat it like it's something foreign, unusual. I like to treat it like it's a piece of meat and make sure that any way that you're cooking it, you're getting it a little brown. Tofu itself has a pretty neutral flavor, so you want to make sure that whenever you are using it, that there's a lot of flavor in the dish. Unfortunately, this dish is very flavorful. And the tofu just adds a nice contrasting texture. Now we can cook the rest of the vegetables. So I'm going to start with a really hot pan. Add a couple tablespoons of oil. And the first thing we're going to put in is the diced ginger and garlic. When you put it in, you should hear a light sizzle. Whenever you're frying garlic in particular, you don't want to put it in the pan when things are too hot, because if you do, it will burn very easily. And we're just going to cook it until the ginger and the garlic get a little translucent and soft, and then we'll add the rest of the vegetables. And we're just going to cook this for about 5 minutes until all the vegetables have softened. I'm going to turn it down low. Just kind of use your ears. When it starts sizzling harder, slow down the heat and turn it down even lower. Because if it's sizzling really loud, that means that it's running out of water. If it runs out of any water, then the temperatures are going to run much hotter and it's going to start to brown. So really don't want that. We want everything to be nice and free of any browning colors, because that can add a rather intense flavor that we don't want at this point. Now I'm going to add the meat. Now, some people use raw meat in the filling. They don't cook it first, but it's a lot safer to go ahead and cook the meat now. Sometimes when you're frying lumpia, the meat doesn't get hot enough, so that's where things get kind of risky. So we'll keep things delicious and safe by cooking it first. I'm smashing the meat with the spatula and chopping it up, trying to make sure that it breaks apart. You really don't want large chunks of meat in one place. You want it all evenly distributed and combined with all the vegetables. So take your time and make sure you're cooking it nice and slow and low, and moving everything around and making sure that it's getting broken apart into fine, even pieces. Yeah. We also have some bean sprouts. And they start off very bulky and large, but as they cook, they shrink and they release a lot of water. So we'll make sure that they get cooked and that all of that water is evaporated while we're cooking. We're also going to season with fish sauce. Not going to use any salt in this dish. We are going to make a sauce for it though, so don't make it too salty. Check your seasoning, make sure that it has the right amount of salt. Leave a little bit of room for the fact that you're going to be dipping it into a sweet, sour, and salty sauce later. All right, now that we've cooked out all the liquids, you can add the tofu. I'm going to drain all the water off of the dried shrimp. I'm going to chop them up very finely, and we can add that into the filling. Dried shrimp are rather intense, and they're also kind of salty. So chop them up very finely. Otherwise, the flavors can be a little bit too powerful when it's rather in large pieces. When you buy dried shrimp, they come in different sizes. I usually like to get a medium size, right? The large ones are rather expensive, and the small ones, I tend to find that they're just too salty, and I don't like the texture. All right. All right, stir to combine. And we're going to set this filling aside to cool, and then we'll get ready to wrap up the lumpia. All right, so now we're going to be making the sweet and sour sauce. So we got 3 cups of water. So one of the unique ingredients that makes the sweet and sour sauce Filipino is the inclusion of banana ketchup. Yes, it's just like ketchup, but no tomatoes, bananas. So we got about a cup of the banana ketchup, which is, funny enough, just as difficult to get out of the bottle as tomato ketchup. And about 1/3 of a cup of sugar. Teaspoon of salt, and then the zest of 1 orange. And for that I'm going to use a microplane, which is a wonderful tool. If you haven't already included one of these in your standard kit for cooking, I would encourage you to pick one up. Right. We're going to put that on the stove and bring that up to a boil. In the meantime, I'm going to make a little cornstarch slurry to thicken the sauce. So I've got a couple tablespoons of cornstarch, and I'm going to add enough water to make a nice slurry. All right, I'm just using a fork to make sure I break up all the lumps. And when we get the sauce to come to a boil, we will whisk in the slurry. All right. So the ketchup and water mixture has come to a boil. I'm going to add in the slurry. And we'll let this come back to a boil for about a minute. And you'll notice that the cornstarch slurry has tremendous thickening power, and it really brings the sauce together. All right, check your seasoning. Make sure it's sweet enough, spicy enough. And of course, if you want to add some other flavors, garlic, or you want to add some more juice to make it a little more sour. And that's it. All right, so for us to finish up wrapping the lumpia, we're going to have to crack an egg. Add a little bit of water, about a tablespoon for each egg. And then whisk it together to make sure you break up all of the egg yolk and the egg white. We're going to use this mixture as glue to seal the spring rolls. All right. So I'm going to take one wrapper. We'll add a couple of tablespoons of filling. We'll lift the wrapper edge up, wrap it around the filling, and pull back to make it tight. We'll fold the ends in and then roll forward. Before you make the last fold, brush it with a little bit of egg, and then roll it the rest of the way. Okay. And that's one wrap. So we'll continue. A couple tablespoons of filling. Wrap it over the filling, pull back, make it nice and firm. Fold those edges in to seal the ends. Brush and finish wrapping. Once you have a few of them wrapped up, we can add them to our oil. And again, you want the oil at about 350 degrees. All right, and we're going to fry those until they're nice and golden. All right, so now that the lumpia is fried until crispy golden, I'm going to pull them out. And I'm going to put them on a tray with a paper towel so that the excess grease can drain off. And you'd be wise to make more than you think you'll need because they disappear quickly. And for the plate, I like to put it with some fresh vegetables. Green cabbage, mung bean sprouts, cucumbers, cilantro, whatever your preference, but something nice and light to give you some fresh flavors and some contrast to the rich fried rolls. You'll also need the sauce. That's it. Fresh lumpia.